Hello and welcome to the year end review, this annual tradition. So, this is the second year for this channel, but the common occurrence for booktubers to, yes, discuss what they read this previous year's, the hits and the misses. Well, last time I did like a tier ranking of everything, what I thought was S, what I thought was A, B, C, mid tier, so so, because it's hard to give a numeric rating for books, but this channel is mostly sci-fi fantasy books, so do expect that, but also expect me to cover a little of everything else I read this year. And I also want to say that, yeah, I feel like these lists come out earlier and earlier every year. Today is December 8th as of this recording, and Spotify Wrapped was already out. The Apple Replay, what I listened to, is already out. And if you're curious, my Apple Replay, yes, I mostly just listen to playlists and background music at work. So my Apple Replay was things like video game soundtracks and, yes, a little bit of K-pop Demon Hunters. It's still got the poster from New York Comic Con, but K-pop Demon Hunters, video game soundtracks, kind of ambient electronic music, progressive house. That's what I'm into to groove in while I'm working. But anyways, on a totally other note, that yes, back to books, what I'm supposed to be talking about. Last year, I did a tier ranking where I tried to just go on my enjoyment. And as I was analyzing my Goodreads stats, which aren't out yet for some reason, but I did pull my Goodreads data, and my average rating across all books I read last year, or all non-comic books, I should say, because I read a lot of manga, and that unfortunately clouds up the list. So in total, I read like over almost 200 books, but over 100 of those were volumes of manga. So Goodreads counts those as individual books, which, yes, of course they are. So I read like all of Naruto this year. I read all of Slam Dunk. I read a lot of, currently reading Attack on Titan. And so that really clouds up the list. But I filtered all my books down to no manga, no comics, no Marvel Unlimited that I logged in Goodreads. And it was only 89 books this year. And it is, yes, only the second week of December. So I'm probably going to finish at least probably two more. So I read about two, three, I think 4 to 6 books per month. I am a fairly fast reader because I read every chance I get, or I should say, I listen every chance I get. I'm always listening on my commutes, on weekend long bike rides. So I'll listen to 5, 6 hours in a huge chunk on the weekends, as well as before, after work, lunch breaks. Yeah, all the time listening to audiobooks. That is how I listen to so many. And of course, yes, I listen to it at usually 1.5 to 1.7, depending on the author, the narrator. But that said, I'm only going to whittle this down and kind of talk about in categories and in general. And again, this is just my enjoyment factor. So when I looked at those 89 books so far as of December, my average rating was 4.19 out of 5 on Goodreads. And my rating system is just how much I enjoyed it. So if I really love something, not necessarily because it was the best written or the prose was so good or the character work was so good, it's more just how did the book make me feel? And as I was picking these, like my favorites of the year, what did I remember and just really stuck with me? Those are the books that really, in my mind, are the S tier, the top ranking books. So I'm only going to talk about those, but also I'll talk a little bit about my, I guess, general year in review. So I started the year, I guess, as I normally do, reading a lot of nonfiction. So with that, yes, that New Year's resolution kind of energy, I read a lot of self-help, personal development style books. Some of the ones that I, yes, got wrapped up in were the ones you see on Audible, like The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. That was, again, worth the hype, but again, it felt like a podcast, nothing super great. Meditations for Mortals by Oliver Berkman, I did like, which is more meditations like a Marcus Aurelius Stoicism, how to kind of maximize your life. Some other books, let me stand over here to fully take up the books. Ones that I did enjoy of the nonfiction genre, which again were mostly at the beginning of the year. Do Hard Things by Steve Magnus, I thought was really interesting, just kind of about human psychology. And if you're into kind of sports or like for myself, endurance sports, pushing your body to achieve greater things and how that's kind of a necessity to grow. So it was interesting kind of sports perspective, like self-help book. Some other books then besides those, just throughout the year, I feel like the whole year arc, I tried a bunch of books in the beginning of the year, and then towards the end of the year, I guess I could say I refined my taste because I learned, I guess, a bit of what was working and what wasn't because I was a bit scattered in my approach early in the year. And then towards the end of the year, I just kind of honed in on, yes, namely epic fantasy and sci fi that I was enjoying and then just kind of continued on those series. But yes, throughout the year, to be on the topic of nonfiction books, I did read a lot of business type books, and the standouts were pretty much every one. So, yes, when I analyzed my numbers, I rated a lot of books highly because I just DNF'd and didn't even log some books that just didn't work. So, I did quit books early, but the ones that I finished were ones that I generally enjoyed. So, those are ones I knew I was going to enjoy. That's hence the high rating. I didn't kind of sort of push through and stick through a book that would be like a 2, that's something I didn't enjoy. If it was going to be a 2 or a 3, I just quit it and only continued on good books. But that said, the business books that I really enjoyed and recommend if you're into technology, the tech scene, I read, yeah, pretty much all the major tech books in my mind that I saw, like Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams, which was the like kind of deep dive into Facebook. Source Code by Bill Gates, I thought was really interesting, and I'm looking forward. I don't know if it's coming out in 26 or 27. Part 2 of Source Code, which is Bill Gates's autobiography. The Thinking Machine by Stephen Witt was about Jensen Huang and NVIDIA. That was a super interesting book for myself because it chronicles the rise of NVIDIA. Well, okay, the Bill Gates book was interesting too because, yes, I grew up on Windows in those early days of tech in the 80s. But the Thinking Machine was interesting also as a retrospective look back at the early days of tech because, yeah, I remember using NVIDIA cards before they were cool. Yes, because gamers, computer nerds are what drove the early NVIDIA. So it was interesting looking back at the company and how then they pivoted with the CUDA technology. They realized that their cards could be used for machine learning and academic purposes and then went hard into AI, where they are now in 2025. So Thinking Machine was interesting. Also, I read a lot of books on like China, which is, of course, yes, an interest area. So I really liked Apple in China by Patrick McGee, which is part history of Apple, but also part history of China. And it tells kind of the story of Apple through the Chinese lens of supply chain, which, yes, if you followed Apple for decades, they moved a lot of their manufacturing, as we all know, with the iPhone, of course, overseas to China with Foxconn. So that was an interesting look into the history of Apple through a supply chain lens, which is, yeah, pretty interesting. Some other books about China was Breakneck, China's Quest to Engineer the Future by Dan Wang, which is also a history of China. But instead of looking at it through a singular company lens, it looks at it through a policy lens. And the argument of the book or the thesis of the book is China is ruled by an engineering state, aka most of the leadership in China has engineering degrees, so they approach managing the country through an engineering lens, hence how they build things like we saw COVID building hospitals overnight, their large high-speed rail network and other public works projects, versus the United States, which is a lawyerly society. Which is what Wong argues that yes, the U.S. leadership has skewed towards yes, most people in high places of politics in the U.S. have law degrees, and he talks about the like litigious society in the U.S. where yes, there has to be impact studies for any time things get done. And at the end of the book, conclusion is yes, both sides could kind of learn from each other. U.S. could kind of clear some of the red tape and build more projects, while at the same time, China should obviously consider a little more of the impact of some of these projects have on the common man. So those were both interesting Chinese like kind of focused books. Some other books that I actually do want recommendations on. Last year in 24, yes, I read some books on AI because I was finishing up my master's in business analytics and AI. And this year, the only AI quote unquote focused book I read was If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies by Elijah Yudkowsky and Nate Soares. So that was sort of a doom and gloom worst case scenario for artificial general intelligence or like superhuman AI. But yeah, I think I'd missed a lot of the ones that were other AI books. There's just so many that to kind of rise above the noise. Every time I look on Goodreads, there's like a million AI books. So I'm just curious to know if you have any recommendations for like the good ones that I might not have already read. But then also in kind of the data sphere, my my co-classmate, my alumni, co-host of our other data podcast, Patricia. We read together The Data Detective by Tim Harford, which was actually an interesting book about how to think critically, even though it's about data. He takes the view from like kind of he's an economist, so not necessarily a data analyst kind of or data scientist role, but just how to interpret figures you see in the news. So it's sort of a newsy kind of critical thinking, how to think better about data, how news organizations and companies and politicians can use data against you, how you can, present numbers in different ways. So just in a book to really kind of think about things differently. So yeah, Tim Harford's Data Detective was good. And lastly, in kind of the nonfiction books that I enjoyed, to speak, I guess, lastly of biographies, I didn't read that many. I guess you can count, yes, the Bill Gates one I mentioned earlier, which was lumped in with the tech stuff. But the one I also enjoyed was Youngmi Mayer's I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying. This was an autobiography, and I think the blurb or somewhere I read could sell it as kind of an X-rated crying in H Mart because, yeah, Youngmi Mayer is also half Korean, but she talks about growing up in a mixed household, but a totally different household experience in childhood compared to Michelle Zauner in Crying in H Mart. So Youngmi Mayer like grew up overseas, but with a Korean and American father, but they lived overseas in other countries. So she did grow up in Korea as an expat, but then moved to the US. So yeah, it's just a really interesting story. And she had a very, yes, interesting life, much different, but similar, but different to Michelle Zauner in Crying H Mart. But it gives us an interesting perspective on growing up in a different culture. So I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed her sense of humor because she does stand up comedy now. So that was the nonfiction I read, and the ones that stood out to me. Moving up into general fiction before I get into the good stuff, the sci-fi fantasy, I read two classics, I guess you could say, as thanks to Reddit, which I am chronically on Reddit, chronically reading all the book subreddits, mainly, yes, print SF, print sci-fi, or fantasy, or some of the other fantasy and science fiction adjacent subreddits, but I do also check out like Suggest a Book and books, and those tend to recommend, which does get crossed over into the fantasy subreddits, like books that people just really loved, even if they're not fantasy. And I sort of agree because the two I read, starting with the lesser of the two, but still notable to mention in this video, was East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This is John Steinbeck, who also wrote a bunch of American classics, an interesting story about the Salinas Valley in California and just America in a different time period. But it's a very character driven, no big plot like a fantasy series would have. But it's an interesting character work of all the crazy characters in the story, not to spoil it too much, but even though it's an older book, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to fans of fantasy in general because it's just so different, but also you're a fan of, I guess, character work, you might like it, but not necessarily world building. Even though I admit, yes, it was interesting seeing that world, and Steinbeck does paint a good picture of life in California at that time. But the one I recently finished, so a little bit of recency bias, but I do understand the hype now, and that's Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. It was blew me away in the sense that I didn't enjoy it at first, but once I stuck with it, it's just something about that book that it still sticks with me. I still think about the characters, even though it's been a couple weeks, but it's just a very rich character driven work. Once they get out of Lonesome Dove is the name of the town where the story starts at, and they're all kind of from, quote unquote, this cast of cowboys. So it's a Western. It takes place in the Old West. So like turn of the century. There's like the Indian Wars. They're talking about fighting Indians. They do fight Indians, but the characters are like retired, sort of semi-retired, I guess, Texas Rangers. It's in the Old West, and there are these gruff characters with Gus and Call and PI, and yeah, there's just so many memorable characters. And once they get going on this Cal drive, it just becomes such a great story with, the male characters and the female characters are all great. It's not like a one-dimensional good guy, bad guy, which kind of East of Eden had a bit of a gray area of who's good, who's bad, because East of Eden's whole thing was like, can you choose to be good? That's the whole Tim Chill thing in East of Eden. But Lonesome Dove, I guess similar feel to East of Eden just because I had read it close by, but I just something about the book. Dawson Dove was, yeah, it was a really good book. I do recommend reading it for fans of fantasy and science fiction, even though I guess maybe more fantasy. It's not a lot of technology going on, but the character work is just so good. Not a lot of adventure, but they do go on adventure on this cow drive from Texas all the way up. Yeah, so Lonesome Dove, recommend. But yes, so now into the good stuff. Moving on to science fiction, fantasy, the meat and potatoes of what I read and enjoy. I tried a bunch of series that were kind of misses for me, I guess you could say. So in general, series, I tried a lot of social media darling books, things I saw blurbs on Goodreads, which, yes, Goodreads is, I guess, of course, skewed to a female reader because, yes, that's the lay of the land right now. More females read books than males. But males, maybe like myself, I enjoy kind of traditional quote unquote fantasy, which is more that sword and sorcery hero stuff, not necessarily character work. 'Cause I do am bigger on world building and like cool worlds and cool adventures. And some of the books I read that just didn't hit and didn't work for me were more character driven drama, a sprinkle of romance. Not that it's bad, just that they had those elements which I know appeal to some readers, but they didn't necessarily work for me. Some of the ones I tried that were, yeah, social media darlings like The Ministry of Time, which you may have heard about like a time travel, which I like time travel, but it just was more kind of old timey with a little bit of time travel. The Stardust Grail by Yume Kitase, it felt a lot like Expanse fanfic, but a little more grounded. It was an interesting concept, but ultimately didn't really like hit like a 5 out of 5 for me. Hamajang Luck by Makana Yamoto also sounded like, okay, it's Ocean's 11, like a heist book, so it sounded good, but just sort of fell flat with the characters, and the setting was just, yeah, nothing special. It felt like a movie that I'd seen before. Like on Angie Kills the King by Evan Lycom. Also, it sounded like an adventure, but it was just Since other social media darlings, Catabasis by R.F. Kuang was not bad. I'll admit it was okay. I like the setting, I like the world building. Some of the motivations of the characters, like why are they in hell, and some of the reasonings for that were maybe a little so-so, but I like the setting a lot and the world building in Catabasis, even if some of the motivations of the characters weren't quite there. And the magic system was an interesting idea, this chalk-based magic. Alchemized was kind of a buddy read with Patricia from the NYU program. She was reading it, loved Manacled, so I kind of read it on her strong recommendations and just seeing the buzz on the internet. So I pushed through it and read it really fast. I enjoyed it because it was Harry Potter, and this is what I said in my review. Alchemized, I don't think would work if it wasn't Harry Potter, but because I knew it was Harry Potter, I did have an interest in kind of seeing an alternate world Harry Potter because, yes, a general fan of Harry Potter, watched all the movies with my son. So, other than that angle, I didn't necessarily vibe with the romance angle, but I liked the war angle, like the middle half of the book where we're learning about the past and some of the corruptions of the story and how it differs from the normal Harry Potter world, but I could connect the dots to Harry Potter. But anyways, it's a Harry Potter book. That's how I felt about it. I didn't, again, click with the romance Hermione and Draco love story. That was not my thing, but the magic system and the world building, because it's based on Harry Potter, did work for me. And then what did I try and not hit? I know I was supposed to talk about only that I liked. So ones I tried and was kind of just warm on. I tried Furies of Calderon, which is the Codex Alera series by Jim Butcher. Jim Butcher, again, a big name. I've never read his most famous series, but I thought Furies of Calderon is supposed to be like a Pokemon Roman Empire. And I just didn't really see the monsters, even though I love Pokemon, but I didn't feel the Pokemon aspect. It was just like a boy doing like hero stuff and not so good. I tried to read more, that adult fiction, I guess you could say, like Assassin's Apprentice, which is Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. I couldn't get into it. I actually DNF'd that one. So even though I DNF'd it, I think it apparently showed up on my list. And I tried Cursed Chalion by Louis McMaster Bujold. That was actually, I enjoyed the character, but I guess why it didn't work for me, well, I like the character work because I could relate to being the older protagonist. I think what I didn't necessarily like all out love was that the magic and fantasy was just like a second aspect of the book compared to the characters, which is not good or bad. Just was I wanted more, I guess, adventures, and it's supposed to be World of the Five Gods, and I didn't really feel the gods' influence in the story. And then what I'm kind of pushing through, or maybe force myself to push through, is the Greenbone Saga, which I've talked about the first two books. So I want to finish it, and I will finish it next year. But while it ticks everything that I want in a series on paper, because yes, I love martial arts and golden age of Hong Kong cinema, which is totally this book with like triads and super powered triad gangsters. This sounds totally up my alley, but it was just so. It might be one of those books where once I read the end of the trilogy, it'll kind of elevate the rest of it once I see how it wraps up. But the first one was okay. Second one, I felt a little bit better, but I'm looking forward to finishing that. And then, yes, what did I two or three sagas that three trilogies that I finished this year? I finished the Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne. So those Shadow of the Gods, those were another one that didn't hit for some reason, even though on paper I should love it. It's Vikings. It was gritty, kind of grim dark, but something about it, like it didn't make it 10 out of 10. I got sucked into the first one, even though it was a confusing start. But once we got to some of the mythology of the world where the gods are coming back and they're traveling to the Valley of the Gods, I started like, okay, I'm here for this. This is cool. I like the world building. I like where this is going. But then I think it just got lost in the second book and the third book which is confusing. I think it may have been because it was audio and I couldn't keep track of the names and the characters. And it was a genre, not genre, but a region, I guess you could say, that I wasn't totally used to. This Viking mythology, Norse. Yeah, all the words that, the names of things just didn't click of what it was, maybe. So it may have been just a me thing, reading the audiobook, where maybe I should have read it slower, but again, I'm usually listening while commuting, so I can't just pause it and look up things. I'm not just like sitting in a room reading this most of the time. So I'm usually, yes, riding a bicycle, either commuting my bike or actually riding a bike or something. So that was maybe on me for not getting into Bloodsworn Saga enough. A Lycanius trilogy by James Islington. I read all three this year, started that series really enjoying it because again it's a time travel book. Like I mentioned, I like time travel. I thought it was a really interesting concept of it's going to involve some kind of time travel and fantasy, but then as we kind of got to the mystery and what was going on with the veil, it just, yeah, I didn't really get it all together. It had a lot of character work. So even though it had a world building that was interesting, I felt like the characters got bogged down for me, what I enjoyed from it. So even though, yes, I admit the epilogue was great, it does tie it all together. Even the final kind of battles in book three were not as climactic as I was hoping, and I was maybe building up in my head because I thought, okay, this is gonna be kind of cool when it all, all these plot points converge. But anyways, that was kind of a me thing, maybe why I didn't enjoy it. But okay, so here now, I'm gonna mark this in the video, these parts of the books that I really enjoyed, and what are those? So my favorite reads of the year in kind of reverse order, reverse chronological order. One of their standouts first will be The Failures by Benjamin Lyer. I thought this was a really interesting debut new novel. So while, yes, I talked about novels that I started and then was like so, reading The Failures makes me, again, hopeful and that I'll, yes, keep trying new series, that it is worth keep trying. I love that it has that, apparently, as I've learned this year, what I enjoy, which is like a mix of science fiction and fantasy, because it has fantasy elements, but also has like science as magic sort of in the background as well. That's kind of a vague way to talk about because it also has like regular magic, I feel, or something going on. We don't really know yet. It's only book one of the trilogy, but I love the world building and has, I guess the proper term is portal fantasy, but if you watch anime or manga, it's like an isekai where characters are transported to another realm and has that aspect, which I just loved. I really loved that aspect of the story, like the isekai portal fantasy of getting transported to another world. And in this other world where you have humans and maybe humans and all this together, and there's like a magic system ish, and it's a band of ragtag adventurers that are like the underdogs, and there's politics going on. There's just kind of all the little aspects together that also, as I read later, I found I enjoyed in series like Sun Eater. So I think if you like Sun Eater, if you like anime and manga, if you like maybe even some Sanderson, like Mistborn stuff, it kind of has maybe aspects of that. So I think if you're just a general fan of kind of the modern style of writing, that you should check out Failures, The Wanderlands by Benjamin Lyer. And then some other series that gave me, again, really enjoyed The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. This is what got me back into Abercrombie after reading the first book of the first law, and then just being so on the first book. When I read The Devils, it just really kind of reignited that love of grimdark, because the first book was, yeah, I didn't really love it. I didn't see what the hype was. But then after reading The Devils, which I absolutely loved, also a band of misfits, these, yes, devils like in the title. So you've got like a vampire, an elf, and a necromancer, and an undying immortal knight, and they're all together fighting a larger evil. It was just such a cool world. I loved the world building. It just felt so like right up my alley with this like dark humor, and I enjoyed that so much. I thought The Failures was great. It just hit every high note for me. And yes, that spurred me to go back and read First Law, the first trilogy, books 2 and 3. And I really enjoyed those once I had, like I guess, another appreciation or in the right mindset of reading Abercrombie's writing. But I thought it was great. I highly recommend Devils. I thought, yeah, amazing. For The Expanse, I read only the first one last year, and then this year I read 2 through 5. So I'm really enjoying The Expanse by James S.A. Corey. Like that's a, yeah, no brainer. I think everyone knows Expanse, and yes, it's always lauded as one of those great series. And it's just great. Yeah, I'm really enjoying the world building where you have the proto molecule that we learned about in book 1, taking on this role in the background and like a larger lore of the universe. And then the characters, even though I said I enjoy characters or enjoy world building more than characters, I'm just grown on the characters in The Expanse. I love Holden and Miller, and everyone on the Rocinante is just great. The more I read, the more I want to keep reading and go back to see what the crew of the Rocinante are up to. But really enjoying The Expanse. That was one of the standouts. Another series that I read, finished, and loved was Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. And if I had to pick like favorites out of the 4 in the initial tetralogy, 4, right? Whatever 4 is, quadrilogy. I like the first one a lot, Shadow of the Torture. And then the last one, Citadel of the Autarch. 1 and 4 were just great. Even though, yes, 2 and 3 are also good. What I read was it was supposed to be one long book, so it kind of makes sense that it's just one story divided up into 4 parts, and it's hard to separate one without the other because it's just one long Severian's journey of craziness, and it all ties together in the end, and just wants you to keep reading, and everything makes sense. And at the same time, nothing makes sense because there's just so many these literary allusions. You don't really know what's going on with the world, with Severian, with Earth and New Sun. And yeah, it just still has me thinking. So highly recommend, again, some old school fantasy, sci-fi fantasy, because yes, there's technology that's become magic in this world because it's in the far future. But yeah, highly recommend Book of the New Sun. And some other books that stuck with me this year, Perdido Street Station by China Miéville was also just weird and crazy in a fantasy kind of sci-fi way. Sci-fi, I guess, in the sense that there is like one character are scientists, so it's got sciencey elements, but it's more fantasy because it's like in another world. So it's, I guess, more on the fantasy side, but has a little bit of science that goes on. But yeah, just really interesting characters and really interesting world building. This was a top tier world building. Perdido Street Station, the station, like the train station, the city that they're in, Baslag, is just Am I saying it right? Yeah, but the city, the world of Perdido Station is crazy. It's like these a bunch of different races together, living together in this living, breathing city. It's one of those tropes where the city is a character, but I really felt it because it's just such a great setting, such a great story. Perdido Street Station was, yeah, and the ending just makes you think. It just sticks with you, so it really sticks the landing. But yeah, really enjoyed Perdido Street Station. Another new series that I read two books for because that's all they're out was The Shadow of the Leviathan, which is The Tainted Cup and a Drop of Corruption. Yes, it deserves all the awards it got. I thought they were amazing. Took me a second to get into the first book because I was just a little bit confused with the whole plant stuff that happens early in the book. But then once I kind of pushed through that and got my bearing, it was like, oh my God, this is great. It's a murder mystery, so it has mystery elements, but has tons of fantasy elements going on with this world where it's like bio magic and human enhancements and the best characters ever. Anna and Din are just amazing. And the second book just expands on it. So if you thought the first book was good, the second book was even better because it delves a little bit deeper into the lore of the world that we learned in the first book. So it's got the science aspect of these leviathans, these titans that are terrorizing the kind of fantasy setting, Eastern and European inspired world. It's got these giant titans that the people of the world are harvesting and using for their body augmentations and powers. And yeah, it's just crazy. So it's got science aspects of it, but it has fantasy aspects. So again, what I'm learning, I love that science fiction fantasy kind of blend. Totally great. Really love A Drop of Corruption. The second book was, yeah, like 10 out of 10. No notes, 5 out of 5. Other books, okay, this one has no fantasy, but it was in reverse order of weird books that stuck with me was Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Yeah, finally read this, even though, yeah, it came out a couple years ago, and love Severance. So if you love Severance, I felt really similar to Severance and Piranesi. And it's just a book that makes you think. It's hard to talk about without spoilers, obviously, but if you read it, you know what I'm talking about. But Piranesi was something else. It was an experience. It was a vibe, as they say, because the world building was just so ethereal. It felt like I was in that world, in the labyrinth with Piranesi. The ending, I felt, yeah, it's just up to interpretation. So it's hard to talk about in spoilers in general terms, but it does make you feel and does make you think. It's a book that makes you think. So that's why it's a notable read for me of the year. And then moving up in order, I think is kind of reverse order of what I enjoyed, but Harry Potter, it's a book that, yes, I read for the first time because as I mentioned way back, connected to Alchemized, I had watched the movies before multiple times with a kid that grew up with the movies. So we've watched Harry Potter multiple times, know the story inside and out. It's just part of the cultural zeitgeist. Read Alchemized and has really wanted to read Harry Potter because I'd never read Harry Potter, the original Harry Potter. But after reading Alchemized, I felt like, yeah, I need to actually read the source material and regular Harry Potter. And when Audible had the full cast edition of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, I read it in a couple days. It was great. I love the audiobook experience because, yes, I'm an audiobook reader. So really highly recommend Harry Potter full cast edition. And yes, I've already pre-ordered the second book, which as of this recording should come out next week. So around this time next week, I'll be reading book 2 of Harry Potter, the full cast audio edition from Audible. So highly recommend that. And then lastly, I guess my top 2, semi recency bias because this is what I most recently read, but I'm really, really enjoying Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. Was everything I was looking for in a D&D inspired epic fantasy series. I tried other series this year that are fantasy series, but something about Malazan where it's a large cast of characters, but I think what the keys for it is, even though it has a bunch of lovable characters like, yes, Whiskey Jack and Quick Ben and all the bridge burners, but more than that, it's the world building. It has a deep lore. So you've got a bunch of other tribes. There's like a larger conflict going on in the background. There's other forces at play. There's gods meddling in with humans. And there's just more mysteries to learn every book. We still don't know at least me as a reader on book three. I'm mostly done with book three, but I still don't know what really like, warrens are and how they work, and the Sister Andy and the whole the history of the world. You really don't know yet. You have glimpses of it and how everything works, how Ascension works, and we I think I know some of these things with all the characters and all the different races, but it just makes you want to keep reading and learning more. And I just really, really enjoyed book one. Book two was so for me. I know a lot of people love Dead House Gates for the characters, but I love book one and then book three now that we've caught back up to the Bridge Burners and Whiskey Jack and Quickpen. I just love Quickpen. I think Quickpen's so cool. Now that we're back to our characters, I'm just really enjoying the world building and the whole storyline. I'm so excited to keep reading this. And then the other series that I'm so excited to keep reading is Sun Eater by Christopher Braccio. So Empire of Silence was solid 4.5 out of 5 for me. It was good. It took a while to get going. That's the only thing I'll knock it down for. But now that I recently just finished this past weekend, so recency bias, book two, Howling Dark, it just also, like Malazan was everything I'm looking for in fantasy. I feel like Sun Eater is everything I'm looking for in science fiction fantasy because it draws from the inspiration clearly of my darling series that I grew up on, like Dune. I feel the echoes of Dune so much in the characters of Hadrian. I feel the influence of Book of the New Sun, which I recently read before this. So it has a lot of these elements of books that I really enjoyed, just kind of blended together for just a really great series. It has world building. It has like a deeper mystery, just like Malazan. It has characters. They have like powers and magic-ish, I guess you could say, but it's more technology based where some people have enhancements and you're fighting other races. So it kind of has fantasy elements. And yeah, it just a really great, it's an adventure. So it is kind of fantasy and adventure. They're going from planet to planet on so far. And yeah, I'm just really, really hyped for Sun Eater. Book two was just so great at the end. I really just tied everything together. And because it has so many callbacks to series I love, like Dune, all the first six books, I felt so many callbacks to all first six of Dune and Book of the New Sun that yeah, I just want to keep reading Malazan and Sun Eater. Those are my two kind of favorites of the year, even though as I went through this list, a ton of great books I read this year. 89 books as this recording, probably within 3 weeks left and the holidays, probably gonna finish a couple more, but I don't know exactly how many. I don't know if I'll hit a full 100 books, but yes, if you count all the manga I read, I'm over almost 200 manga volumes. But tons of great stuff this year. So hope you enjoyed this list. I'll maybe show a screenshot of just the top couple here as text, but hopefully you might find something new for yourself to read. If you have recommendations based on this list, so people that like XYZ, if there's something that I should try based on this, I'll do a separate video for my planned reads for 2026 because yes, I spent a ton of not a decent chunk of money during the Audible sale, so I have a good backlog catalog to get through on Audible, like Red Rising and the rest of Sun Eater and Malazan and Harry Potter. So besides those, yeah, I'm always looking to supplement with books from the local library because most of the books on this list were Libby checkouts through the library. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this was interesting to see what I enjoyed this year, and I would love recommendations for new things to enjoy. So I'll move back to the center. Yeah, I would love to check out new series. I feel like I'm discovering a bunch of series, so I want to, again, keep reading more. I'm not necessarily trying to hit a numeric target, but yeah, I'm looking for about 100 books to consume next year. So I'm plenty of room on the list to fill out when you're trying to read, or you're probably not trying, but you're probably going to read close to 100 books. So would love to fill it up with a bunch of recommendations. So thanks for watching and happy New Year, happy holidays, and happy reading ahead in 2026. So thanks for watching and talk to you later. Bye.